Thank you, everyone. Hi, Ambarish.
Okay, thanks so much for having me here.
So you've
The real me back there, no suits, real technologist.
so you're actually just coming from Global Fintech Fest, which has emerged as a really big event for your sector. Um, I think I'm going to start by asking you, I mean, what were the big highlights? A lot of people I spoke to, I missed it because I was here, was that last year the big theme was the funding crunch across fintech and the larger startup ecosystem. This year it was all about the regulatory changes that have kind of become a part and parcel of the fintech industry in the past year or so. What did you take away from GFF this year?
Yeah, I mean, GFF is like a Kumbh, right? It is, I don't know how many of you know this, but last year there were 50,000 people. This year on the first day, from what I told, it's first day itself, they had more than 50,000. I think second day, probably like upwards of 80,000 people showed up in the Geo World Center. So it's an amazing festival of things. In fact, the Honorable Prime Minister was there on the last day, on Friday, yesterday. And he talked about it as a festival. He said it's a time of festivals, and this is another festival in this time. But coming back to your question of like what was amazing is that there are a ton of launches. One of the sort of big features that we also launched there was UPI Circle, which a lot of you may want to sort of try it out, is be able to delegate payments to your daughter or son or driver so that they're able to use it without you transferring the money. There's a bunch of other features launched. There's a ton of discourse on regulations. Of course, there is a ton of discourse on where India is going, macroeconomy, financial inclusion. So all of these things combined together. Mr. Nandan Nilekani talked about Finternet, which is sort of where do we go from here? What happens to tokenization of land records, assets, stuff like that. So quite an amazing thing. But I tell you something, the biggest thing that happens there is the side conversations. I think there is the stage conversations that happen, but if you come there and you have the side conversations, that's when sort of you get the insights.
So I know you didn't mention what Sameer Nigam, the PhonePe founder, had to say, which is, and you are also grappling with the whole market share issue, the capping of UPI market share, which has been proposed, hasn't been implemented. And Sameer said this out loud, that for them to go and tap the public markets, it's impossible to do so with this uncertainty in mind. I know you do not have to list here, but tell me, as the second largest player in the UPI market, how is this uncertainty played out? The fact that there could be a capping.
So I was telling Samidha,
so Ambarish actually told me that, Sameer is a founder. I'm an employee.
Now she's bringing in the backstage conversations in here. But I think, look, Samidha, I was telling you, I may play on your name here, and I got your permission backstage somewhat. Right? So Samidha means, this Havan ki lakdi, right?
That you're going to put me in the Havan.
No. You're creating the fire. But idam namama, going to the Havan itself. I mean, those of you who do Havan would recognize idam namama because you say that a lot of times. The modern interpretation of it is that, see, these transactions are not for us. It is for the public good and truly for the public good. I think we work on top of a DPI infrastructure. And so you said grappling with market share. There is no grappling with market share. The market is very large. There were, close to 15 billion transactions last month on UPI. So it's a very large market. Very large number of players are playing in it. Now there's been this talk of market share caps and stuff like that. I think, look, the regulators and the government, we can do all kinds of backseat driving. We can say, hey, they should do this, they should do that, or not. But in the end, the regulators and government are balancing a lot of things. Some of it we become privy to because they would say, look, watch out for this or that. But I don't see a challenge with, I think, either sort of, this issue of market share, because I think there is a large number of players who are operating in it, large number of TPAPs, and there is scope for everybody. Now, the thing that we should talk about and worry about it is, are consumers getting what they need? And so is this interoperable, open? We've always stood for open, interoperable systems that are safe. And so let me give you some stats from GPay for that interoperability. In your mind, just think about how many P2M transactions from GPay terminate outside of GPay. Just think about that for a second and then I'll give you the answer. The answer is close to 90%. 90% of P2M transactions from Google Pay are going to some other entity. Now you say, hey, you're just talking about merchant transactions. Of all transactions that Google Pay does, 65% of those transactions end outside of Google Pay. So it's already an interoperable system. It is working like that, and many of you are using different apps. So I think the right things are happening. I have learned over a period of time that you've got very well-meaning system. We are all trying to create growth in a very safe way. So I'm sure the regulators and the government are balancing a bunch of things that we should let them balance.
No, fair point. But can you talk a bit about this whole effort to get more players in? Because between you and PhonePe, it's almost 80–90% of the market. Smaller players aren't seeing that much of an incentive to come and join UPI because obviously there's an MDR issue. You still do not make money on the transactions in a significant manner. So how do you kind of incentivize more fintech players to come into the UPI fold, because it has been dominated by Google Pay and PhonePe for a fairly long amount of time?
Look, you're using words that are like, which is why I rightly said, havan ki lakdi. It's a very pious thing too. But sorry, I took permission once and played on it twice. I'm done with that. I think the thing is, look, we are not the largest player, to be clear, in the market today.
Your market share has come down a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Is that a conscious effort?
No, I think there is more competition, more players in the market. I've lost count of how many TPAPs are out there. TPAPs are third-party applications. And more are coming, actually. Folks who are not in the fintech business are also launching TPAPs. So there is no dearth of more players. There is enough players in the market. There is enough competition. Now, the question of viability, whether they are economically sustainable, I think, and I was mentioning this to Samita backstage also, is that when there is a lot of players running after just that single thing, single market, maybe it's harder because it gets crowded. But there are enough players in the market to keep it safe and secure. The thing that I would urge for startups is, instead of doing the same thing, you should think about what niche do you have? What is the angle, right? When you try to create a business model, you say, why would anybody come to me? And every startup has to think about that and say, what is my unique, what is USP, what's my unique selling proposition, because of which people will come to me, instead of saying, look, somebody else did this, therefore I'm going to do the same playbook. Now, they can be a UPI TPAP, but what is their playbook? Like, what are you bringing? And there's enough money to be made in the ecosystem. It's not true that there's not enough money in the ecosystem. One of our competitors just had a financial report come out, and I think they're making enough money.
So talk a bit about your recent initiatives on the back of UPI. You did launch a few at GFF. And, what more are you doing to kind of, get, different aspects to leverage from UPI?
So, let me take just a couple of steps back for 30 seconds. I think overall, we've had a story that is built on the digital public infrastructure, which has come a long way, right? I don't know how many of you know this, but 2005 is when the Department of Payment and Settlement Systems was, initiated in RBI. 2008 was when NPCI was launched, 2010 Aadhaar came, 2014 Jan Dhan happened, 2016 was a huge surge in internet, 2016 is when UPI also launched. So we've been working on the back of this, any success is sort of many, many years in the making. And so payments has been a very big part of it. We have a bunch of use cases there. But now I think, how do you include more people? So UPI Circle is a very good thing where it can include people who may not have bank accounts or who may not be using bank accounts. But beyond this, I think one thing that is very underpenetrated in India is credit, right? I think credit is if you look at whether retail credit to GDP ratios, or if you look at number of credit cards to population, like number of credit card to population in India is like 6–7%. In the US, that number is upwards of 200%. Same thing like retail credit to GDP. Any of these metrics that you take are very underpenetrated. But how do you enable credit in a very responsible way, in a way that keeps the ecosystem secure, it's regulated apps, keeps the lenders secure as well as doesn't over-leverage the consumer. So you're going to see much more stuff here. Artificial intelligence will help a lot. If you're listening to the governor, I was there listening to him when he launched this in Bangalore, but he talked about the new trinity. The old trinity is JAM, Jandan Aadhaar and mobile. The new trinity he talked about was, he said JAM, UPI and ULI. This is unified lending interface. How does the data flow seamlessly? Dairy records, dairy pouring records, asset records, land records, stuff like that, account aggregator, all of that comes together. And then can AI work on top of that to enable the right credit to the right person? Today the stat is only 1 in 5 people who can actually are eligible for credit. Only 1 in 5 gets it. If you go to MSMEs, even bigger opportunity. MSMEs, only 1 in 6 will get credit when they can get credit. So there is a huge opportunity to enable it, but we have to enable it in a responsible way. And when we do that, somebody who couldn't get healthcare will get it. Somebody who couldn't, buy the car they want to buy will buy it. Somebody who couldn't buy the Diwali clothes will buy it. And it'll create a sort of resurgence in the nation, which is, and it is already happening, but it'll grow in a way which is incredible. And the last thing I'd say, again, sort of stepping back, is India in 2023, to the world GDP growth contributed 16%. So 16% of the world, 16% of the world GDP growth came from India in 2023. What is your guess? Now, these are not my numbers or Google numbers. These are WEF or IMF and World Economic Forum numbers that you can actually piece together. If you piece them together, what do you think is the amount of, the percentage of growth between 2025 and 2050 that will be contributed by India? So between 2025 and 2050, what is your guess, Samida?
Not a guess.
Okay, she doesn't want to answer my questions. But I think if you're just thinking about a guess in your mind, that number is 40%. If you sort of piece these things together. So India is going to be a very large participant in the economic growth of the world. The new growth that is coming, 40% of that between 2025 and 2050 will come from India. Thank you. So I think we have a very large role to play. Credit will play a large role. Payments will play a large role. And one day I think, and hopefully that study happens in saying, look, how much of the economic growth of India has been contributed by UPI? And that'd be an amazing number, I think.
So is there any plan for you to get into, financial services at large in the license space? Because that's something that, you guys have not really entered in India. It's largely been very UPI focused so far. And what was the thought behind that?
Look, I think at least we don't think of license or no license. Actually, what we think of is that what is it that we can uniquely contribute to? If we can, and that's how I think startups or other folks should be looking at. You think about what can you contribute to, and there you say, look, what assets do I have? What capital do I have? What kind of talent I have? What kind of businesses are we in? And then you say, okay, if you want to do this, does it require a license? And if it does, we'll do that. For example, maybe you're not aware of this, but we have a payment aggregator license from RBI.
No, I'm aware,
Yeah. So it's not that we're shying away from licensed businesses, but I think it's about whether there is a use case for it, whether something uniquely that we can contribute to it, and where we can contribute to it, we have actually welcomed whatever needs to be done. And sometimes there are official licenses, sometimes there are sort of approvals that you need to have. So wherever we need to do that, we'll do that. But I think we have to be able to uniquely contribute. There is no reason in everybody going after every license and saying, hey, there is a lot of times startups will say, hey, why don't you give me this license? But unless you're going to use it, there's no value. Just having the optionality of it isn't really useful. So our goal is that don't go after licenses just like that. Figure out the use case. If there is a use case, we work on it and we'll enable it. But the whole idea in the end is work with the ecosystem. We are not a bank. We work with a bunch of banks. Like, we are not a lot of things that we'll work with a bunch of folks, and then the right things come together for the consumer.
You also have, sort of announced some commitment of about, 10 billion or something a couple of years back. Are you doing a lot of fintech investments? Is that something, that's sort of core focus for you?
Look, the investment that Samita is talking about is a $10 billion fund that we created for India a few years back called India Development Fund. India Digitization Fund, actually. And the idea was that we are able to invest in the ecosystem and startups as well as big companies, and we've made some big investment and small investments across the board. In fintech, we have made a bunch of investments there already. And as we, again, it's not about saying, hey, I want to make a fintech investment. It's about where we see that, okay, this will have an impact. And if there is a strategic alignment on that, then we'll make those investments and definitely making it. The recent one, which is an interesting one that, maybe the most recent one that happened from that is a company called Nama Yatri, which is in the ONDC space. So we are making these investments both internally as well as externally in the DPI and as well as public spaces.
Talk a bit about, I know you just touched upon the AI part. I think again, Shailendra from Peak 15, he was talking about, AI not being used as much in India. Again, this is all GFF conversations. Are you seeing enough of that happening across fintechs and the larger ecosystem compared to, say, US, where
I mean, who am I to debate with Shailendra? We can debate that.
this is what he said.
Yeah. I think the point is, if I can take again a step back, because I was telling Samita also, the goal is you'll remember hopefully a few things and tidbits that I give here. Look, AI is very, very old. It's not new. The term AI was coined by Professor John McCarthy in 1955. Okay, and even Gen AI that people talk about, Gen AI is at least 10 years old, if not more old, because there's a thing called generative adversarial networks that was started in 2014, again, a Google paper. Everything that is happening today in the Gen AI space, all the LLMs that we talk about, are based on a technology called transformers architecture, which was a paper that Google published in 2017. I'm tooting my own horn, but these are all facts. Google published this paper in 2017, which says attention is all you need. Now, if you're Beatles fans, you know what it's a play on. But so that paper has been, so AI has been around for a long time. The use cases of AI have been around for a long time. AI/ML is being used in, for example, fraud detection in a big way. We've been using this in a big way. We announced we probably saved 12,000 crores in the last year just on sort of financial frauds and stuff like saving them. So it is getting used. Look, some of these things take time and then suddenly they take off. But I think AI is being used. Gen AI use cases are also happening. For example, just Google in India, across the board, it is getting assimilated in different products like search, cloud, YouTube, workspace. You're starting to see all of that. And some of this is underneath. A lot of the iceberg is underneath. It is getting used in models in different ways. We are using it, of course, in a big way in fraud and decision making. But you are also seeing the more interesting part is the Gemini, for example, the product is out there, but the model itself is a platform. So you can, any developer can use exactly the same model that is being used internally for using externally. So there are tons of healthcare use cases that are starting to happen in medicine, as well as creating new set of pharma and all. In agriculture, there are use cases, education. So you're seeing a bunch of use cases, and I think suddenly they'll explode is what you're going to see.
Very interesting that you brought fraud detection. I mean, that's something that, again, was spoken about a lot and has been, fintech has been at the forefront of sort of getting affected because the regulator also wants, very guardrails to protect, consumers as the transaction numbers go up. How are you using that? Because again, you're completely consumer focused, with Google Pay. What are the, things that you have implemented to kind of get those checks in place?
So fraud and safety is a super important thing. In fact, the Honorable Prime Minister yesterday at GFF also talked about this topic and said this is really important. And by the way, you create a new, new technique, और उसकी बाल मृत्यु हो जाती है. Because there is like this cat and mouse game. I used this term a couple of times that you guys have to stay ahead of it. Because you should make sure that sort of you don't have sort of a baal mrityu of this attack. So we use it and try to stay ahead. First is that we keep looking at transactions in different ways and say, could this be a fraudulent transaction? And we will warn you and say this might be a fraudulent transaction, depending on the probability and threshold that we have that our AI models tell us. But sometimes we will see that, hey, this seems like definitely fraud. We'll stop that transaction. We say, even if it's a friction, we don't want to let that transaction go through. To my team, there is a clear direction that, let's say you find a pool of thousands of transactions. You say, I don't know which one, but one of them is fraud. I'm like, stop all of them, please, because I don't want anybody to lose their life savings. We will take a little bit of less growth. We will take a little bit of flack on that. But when somebody loses 20,000 rupees, perhaps nobody in this room cares about 20,000 rupees as much, but when somebody loses 20,000 rupees, they lose their life savings at times. And it is incredibly painful. It is hard to sleep with that. And so I think it's very, very, very critical to do that. But we'll keep playing that, keep going after that, and hopefully we'll sort of keep winning this, this war on fraud. The other thing, last thing I'd say is that this is something that Google did a demo of. There's a technology called ScamGuard. That we did a demo at Google I/O, where what happens is, how many of you receive this call saying customs officer is calling, you've got like some problem in there, right? Now, when you get this call, I see some hands go up there. So my wife got this call too. Some people got duped of lakhs of rupees, right? Now, problem is you get a phone, they create urgency saying police will catch you, this, that, you suddenly like transfer something. Say, I want to not get into this. But now we're developing technology. Now we did a demo of that, and this is all on device. It is not going to Google. Your calls are not going to Google at all. It's on device, where you can give the consent, enable it, where if you do a conversation, the phone will say, hey, this seems like a scam. Please stop. Worry about this call and don't take an action just because of this. So there is stuff that will stay ahead of here.
Thanks, Ambarish. We're totally out of time, but I'm sure audience has some questions they can address later on.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
everyone.
Really appreciate it. Yeah.